If tomorrow morning a narrow stretch of water only about 33 kilometers wide suddenly shuts down, the price of fuel in the United Kingdom could surge, global shipping could freeze, and the world economy could feel shockwaves within hours. That place already exists, and it's called the Strait of Hormuz. It's quietly between Iran and Oman, yet nearly one-fifth of the world's oil passes through it every single day. Think about that for a moment. Almost 20% of the fuel that powers cars, heats homes, runs industries, and keeps airplanes in the sky travels through this single corridor. And right now, with tensions in the Middle East rising again, the Strait of Hormuz is once more at the center of global attention. In this video, we're going to unpack everything about this strategic waterway. We'll explore what the Strait of Hormuz actually is and how geography created it millions of years ago. We'll explain how Iran came to dominate one side of it and why that gives Tehran enormous leverage over global energy markets. We'll also look at how the Strait actually works in practical terms, the shipping lanes, the traffic systems, and the naval presence that keeps the world's oil moving. And most importantly, we'll examine why the current conflict atmosphere is making governments in London, Washington, and across Europe extremely nervous. Because if anything disrupts this narrow passage, the consequences will reach far beyond the Middle East. It could affect petrol prices in Manchester, electricity costs in London, and shipping routes across the globe. But to understand why this thin line of water carries so much power, we need to start with a simple question. What exactly is the Strait of Hormuz? Geographically, the Strait of Hormuz is a narrow maritime passage connecting the Persian Gulf with the Gulf of Oman and the wider Arabian Sea. On the northern side sits Iran, and on the southern side are Oman and the United Arab Emirates. At its narrowest point, the strait is only about 21 miles wide, which might sound fairly large. But for global shipping, that's incredibly tight. Inside that space, there are designated shipping lanes that are even narrower, only a few miles across, where the giant oil tankers must travel in carefully managed directions. To picture it clearly, imagine a busy motorway where massive tankers the size of skyscrapers move slowly through a funnel-shaped channel. On one side lies Iran's coastline, dotted with military bases and radar stations. On the other side sit the Arab Gulf states, whose economies depend heavily on exporting oil through this very route. Now here's where things get fascinating. The Strait of Hormuz was not created by human borders or political decisions. It was formed by geology millions of years ago. The Arabian tectonic plate has been slowly pushing northward into the Eurasian plate. This collision lifted mountain ranges across Iran and created the basin that became the Persian Gulf. Over time, seawater filled that basin, but the opening toward the Indian Ocean remained extremely narrow. That narrow outlet became what we now call the Strait of Hormuz. In other words, the world's most important oil choke point is essentially the result of ancient tectonic movements. Nature created a bottleneck, and modern civilization built its energy system around it. 2 minutes into this story, here's something that may surprise you. Despite the fact that the strait is so critical to the global economy, no single country actually owns it entirely. International law treats it as a transit passage, meaning ships from all nations have the right to pass through it. But geography gives Iran a unique advantage, because the northern shoreline belongs to Iran, and several islands in the strait are controlled by Tehran. The Iranian military has a direct line of sight over much of the shipping traffic. This doesn't mean Iran conquered the strait in a single historical event. There was never a dramatic invasion where Tehran suddenly seized control. Instead, Iran inherited its position through geography and history. For centuries, the Persian empires that ruled this region controlled the northern coast of the Gulf. Later, during the era of European colonial expansion, the British Empire dominated the southern side through protectorates in Oman and the Gulf states, but Iran's northern presence remained constant. After the Iranian Revolution in 1979, the new Islamic Republic began investing heavily in military capabilities designed specifically for the Strait of Hormuz. The Iranian Navy and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy developed strategies focused on asymmetric warfare. Instead of relying on massive fleets like the United States Navy, Iran built fast attack boats, anti-ship missiles, naval mines, and coastal defense systems designed to threaten shipping in the strait. And this is where the strategic importance becomes crystal clear. Every day, roughly 20 million barrels of oil pass through the Strait of Hormuz. That's about a fifth of global oil consumption. Tankers carry crude from Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, and the United Arab Emirates through this narrow gateway before heading toward Europe, Asia, and beyond. Liquefied natural gas from Qatar also travels through the same route. So when analysts in London talk about energy security, the Strait of Hormuz is always part of the conversation. Let's pause here for a moment because the next detail explains why governments around the world monitor this waterway so closely. Despite being over 6,000 kilometers away from the United Kingdom, disruptions in the Strait of Hormuz can affect British households within days. If shipping slows or stops, global oil supply tightens immediately. Markets react instantly, prices surge, and because energy costs influence everything from transportation to manufacturing, the ripple effect spreads rapidly through the economy. We saw hints of this in the past, during periods of tension between Iran and Western countries. Even rumors of potential closure of the strait caused oil prices to spike. Traders know that if the strait were blocked even temporarily, replacing that lost flow of energy would be extremely difficult. Now here's another key point that many people don't realize. The strait isn't just about oil, it's also about military power and international presence. Several global navies patrol the surrounding waters. The United States Fifth Fleet operates from Bahrain, maintaining a constant watch over the region. British naval forces have also maintained a presence to protect shipping routes, international. Coalitions regularly conduct patrols to ensure freedom of navigation. But the geography still favors Iran in certain ways. The Iranian coastline runs along the entire northern edge of the strait. Mountains rise behind that coastline, providing natural locations for radar systems and missile batteries. Iran has also fortified islands like Keshem and Abu Musa, which sit near the shipping lanes. From these positions, Iranian forces can monitor tanker traffic and potentially threaten vessels if tensions escalate. 4 minutes into our discussion, here's a crucial question. How exactly could Iran control or disrupt the strait if it chose to? The answer lies in strategy rather than outright blockade. Completely sealing the strait would be extremely difficult because international naval forces would respond quickly. Instead, Iran's approach focuses on making the passage too dangerous for normal shipping. For example, naval mines could be deployed in shipping lanes. Even a small number of mines would force tankers to slow down while clearance operations begin. Fast attack boats could harass commercial vessels. Anti-ship missiles launched from coastal batteries could threaten tankers moving through the channel. Even if only a few ships were targeted, insurance costs for shipping companies would skyrocket. Many tankers might refuse to enter the area at all. In effect, the strait could become economically closed without being physically blocked. This strategy is often described by military analysts as area denial. Instead of stopping every ship directly, you create enough risk that the global shipping industry chooses to avoid the route, and this brings us to the present moment. With tensions rising across the Middle East, particularly involving Iran and its regional rivals, the Strait of Hormuz has once again become a focal point of international concern. Whenever conflict intensifies in the region, headlines quickly turn to one question: could Iran attempt to disrupt the strait? Because if that happened, the consequences would be immediate and global. Oil markets would react within minutes. Governments would scramble to secure alternative supply routes. Strategic reserves might be released to stabilize prices, and naval forces from multiple countries would likely move quickly to protect shipping. But here's the deeper issue that analysts in the United Kingdom and Europe worry about. There are very few alternative routes for the massive volume of energy that currently passes through the Strait of Hormuz. Some pipelines exist that allow Gulf countries to export oil without using the strait, but their capacity is limited. They can only handle a fraction of the total flow. That means the world remains heavily dependent on this narrow waterway. 6 minutes into our exploration, consider this. A channel just a few dozen kilometers wide plays a central role in powering modern civilization. From petrol stations in Birmingham to factories in Germany and power plants in Asia, energy flows that originate in the Persian Gulf often pass through this exact corridor. And that's why the Strait of Hormuz isn't just a regional geographic feature, it's a global strategic chokepoint. Yet the story becomes even more complicated when we look at the political dynamics surrounding it. Iran doesn't simply view the strait as a shipping route. For Tehran, it's also a strategic card away to deter foreign pressure and sanctions. Iranian leaders have repeatedly stated that if their oil exports are blocked by international sanctions, they could respond by threatening traffic through the strait. It's essentially a warning that energy disruption would affect not just Iran, but the entire world. This idea has appeared many times in political speeches and military exercises conducted by Iran's naval forces. And that leads us to a powerful question we'll continue exploring in the next part of this video. If the Strait of Hormuz is so crucial to global energy security, why has the world allowed such a vital choke point to remain so vulnerable? Because the answer reveals a complex mix of geography, politics, military strategy, and economic dependence that has been building for decades. In the next section, we'll dive deeper into how global powers, including the United Kingdom, prepare for potential crises in the Strait of Hormuz, how oil markets react to even small disruptions, and why the current geopolitical tensions could make this narrow passage the most important piece of water on Earth. Now imagine waking up one morning and discovering that the world's most important oil highway has suddenly become a battlefield of tension, military patrols, and uncertainty. Tankers hesitate at the entrance, insurance companies panic, energy traders in London watch their screens as prices jump within minutes. And governments across Europe begin emergency meetings. That scenario might sound dramatic, but when we talk about the Strait of Hormuz, it's not science fiction. It's a possibility that global leaders quietly prepare for every single year. Because here is the reality that many people don't realize: the Strait of Hormuz is not just a narrow waterway carrying oil tankers. It is also a strategic pressure point in global geopolitics. Whoever can influence this corridor gains leverage over energy markets, shipping routes, and international diplomacy. And this is where Iran's role becomes incredibly important. Iran does not technically own the strait, but it controls the northern coastline and several islands that sit directly beside the shipping lanes. That geographic advantage gives Tehran the ability to monitor, track, and potentially threaten vessels moving through the corridor. Iran's military planners have spent decades preparing for scenarios in which they might need to challenge or disrupt traffic in the strait. Instead of building a conventional navy designed for open ocean warfare, Iran developed what experts often describe as a swarm strategy. This strategy relies on speed, numbers, and geography. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard Navy operates fleets of small, fast attack boats that can move quickly through the narrow waters of the Gulf. These boats may appear modest compared to large Western warships, but their strength lies in their ability to operate in groups, surrounding larger vessels and creating unpredictable threats. Alongside these fast boats, Iran has invested heavily in coastal missile systems. Anti-ship missiles positioned along Iran's mountainous coastline can potentially target vessels traveling through the shipping lanes. Radar systems placed on high ground give Iranian forces visibility over much of the strait. Then there are naval mines. Naval mines are one of the most disruptive tools in maritime warfare. They are relatively cheap to deploy, but extremely dangerous for shipping. Even the suspicion that mines have been placed in a shipping lane can force tankers to slow down or avoid the area entirely while minesweepers conduct careful clearance operations. And here's the key point that many analysts emphasize: Iran does not need to permanently block the Strait of Hormuz to cause major global disruption. Even temporary uncertainty could send shockwaves through global markets. Oil trading works heavily on expectations. If traders believe that supply could be interrupted, prices often rise immediately. That means even small incidents in the strait can trigger reactions far beyond the region itself. 8 minutes into this story, here's something particularly important for viewers in the United Kingdom to understand. The UK does not import the majority of its oil directly through the Strait of Hormuz. Britain has supplies from the North Sea and other global markets, but oil is traded internationally and prices are determined on global exchanges. So if shipping in the strait slows down, global supply tightens, and prices rise everywhere. That means petrol prices at British fuel stations can climb even if the oil itself was not originally destined for the UK. It's a perfect example of how deeply interconnected modern energy systems have become. But to truly understand why the strait remains such a sensitive flashpoint, we need to look at the broader regional tensions that surround it. Iran sits in a complicated geopolitical neighborhood across the Gulf-like countries such as Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Qatar. Many of these states have long-standing political rivalries with Tehran. At the same time, global powers like the United States and the United Kingdom maintain security partnerships with several Gulf states. This creates a situation where the waters around the Strait of Hormuz are frequently patrolled by multiple navies. American warships regularly operate in the region as part of efforts to protect international shipping. British naval vessels have also participated in maritime security missions designed to escort tankers and ensure safe passage. These patrols are meant to prevent escalation, but they also highlight how sensitive the area is. Even a minor incident between patrol boats, drones, or surveillance aircraft could quickly escalate into a larger diplomatic crisis. 10 minutes into our exploration, let's talk about one of the biggest questions experts often ask. Could the Strait of Hormuz actually be closed? The short answer is that a complete long-term closure would be extremely difficult. International naval forces possess significant capabilities to reopen shipping lanes. Minesweepers, surveillance aircraft, and escort fleets could be deployed rapidly. Major powers have strong incentives to keep the corridor open. However, short-term disruptions are far more realistic. A few damaged ships, suspected mines, or missile threats could temporarily halt tanker traffic. Even a pause lasting several days would cause major stress in energy markets. That's why governments keep strategic oil reserves. Countries including the United Kingdom maintain emergency stockpiles of oil that can be released if global supply is disrupted. These reserves are designed to stabilize markets and provide time for shipping routes to recover. But reserves are only a temporary solution. If the Strait of Hormuz were seriously disrupted for weeks or months, the global economy would face much more serious challenges. To reduce that risk, several Gulf countries have tried to build alternative export routes. For example, pipelines have been constructed that carry oil from inland fields directly to ports outside the Persian Gulf. Saudi Arabia has pipelines that reach the Red Sea, allowing some exports to bypass the strait entirely. The United Arab Emirates has a pipeline connecting its oil fields to the port of Fujairah on the Gulf of Oman. However, these pipelines can only handle part of the total production. Even with these alternatives, a large portion of Gulf energy exports still depends on the Strait of Hormuz. 12 minutes into the video, here's another critical detail that often gets overlooked. The strait is not only about oil tankers, it is also vital for liquefied natural gas shipments, especially from Qatar, one of the world's largest LNG exporters. Liquefied natural gas is a crucial energy source for many countries, particularly in Europe and Asia. LNG shipments must travel by specialized tankers, and many of those vessels pass through the Strait of Hormuz on their way to global markets. In recent years, Europe has increased its reliance on LNG imports, especially after major changes in global gas supply patterns. That means disruptions in the strait could influence not only oil prices, but also gas markets and electricity costs. Energy security planners in London, Brussels, and other European capitals constantly monitor these risks. But the geopolitical dimension goes even deeper. For Iran, the Strait of Hormuz represents a strategic balancing tool. When Tehran faces economic pressure, sanctions, or diplomatic isolation, the possibility of tension in the strait can serve as a form of leverage. Iranian leaders have occasionally suggested that if their own oil exports are restricted, other countries should not expect smooth passage for their energy shipments either. These statements are usually part of political signaling rather than direct threats, but they illustrate how central the strait is to regional power dynamics. 14 minutes into this analysis, we need to ask a broader question. Why has the global economy allowed itself to become so dependent on a single narrow maritime corridor? The answer lies in history and infrastructure. For decades, the Persian Gulf has been one of the richest sources of oil and gas on Earth. Massive reserves discovered during the 20th century transformed Gulf states into major energy exporters. Over time, refineries, pipelines, ports, and shipping networks developed around those resources. Because the geography of the region funnels maritime traffic through the Strait of Hormuz, the entire system grew around that reality. Changing such a system is extremely difficult. Building new pipelines across deserts and mountains requires enormous investment. Developing alternative energy sources takes time and global demand. For energy remains extremely high. As a result, the world continues to rely heavily on the same narrow passage that formed millions of years ago through tectonic movements. 16 minutes into the story, there's another layer worth considering. Technology and surveillance have dramatically changed how the strait is monitored. Modern satellites track shipping traffic in real time. Radar systems follow tanker movements. Naval intelligence networks analyze patterns of activity across the Gulf. This means that even small shifts in military positioning or shipping behavior are noticed almost instantly by analysts and governments around the world. Energy traders in financial centers like London often react within minutes to news from the region. Sometimes even rumors can move markets. If reports emerge that a tanker has been harassed or that military exercises are taking place near the strait, oil prices may jump as traders anticipate possible disruption. That shows just how sensitive the global energy system is to developments in this narrow stretch of water. 18 minutes into the video, consider the human dimension as well. Thousands of sailors pass through the Strait of Hormuz every year aboard commercial vessels. Tanker crews often navigate the route under careful instructions and sometimes under naval escort when tensions are high. For these crews, the strait is not just a geopolitical symbol. It is a real workplace where navigation must be precise and awareness constant. Shipping lanes in the strait are tightly organized. There are specific inbound and outbound corridors separated by a buffer zone. Tankers must follow these lanes carefully to avoid collisions in such a crowded waterway. Despite the tension that sometimes surrounds the area, millions of barrels of oil continue to pass through safely every day. That consistency is one reason the global economy has been able to rely on the strait for so long, but the possibility of disruption never completely disappears. And that is why the Strait of Hormuz continues to capture the attention of policymakers, military strategists, and energy analysts across the world, because at the center of all this complexity lies a simple geographical fact. A narrow channel connecting the Persian Gulf to the open ocean carries an enormous share of the world's energy supply. If that channel remains open and stable, global markets function normally. If it becomes unstable, the effects ripple across continents. For viewers in the United Kingdom, it might seem like a distant location on the map, yet its impact reaches directly into everyday life through fuel costs, shipping prices, and economic stability. So when headlines mention tensions around the Strait of Hormuz, they are not simply describing a regional dispute. They are highlighting one of the most critical pressure points in the modern global economy, and that is why governments, navies, and energy companies will continue watching this narrow waterway very closely in the years ahead.